Picture this. A child vanishes from a Moscow playground in 1967. No screams, no struggle. Just gone. The only witness, a trembling grandmother, whispers about shadows. Green shadows. Not the green of leaves or grass, but something otherworldly. Something that shouldn't exist. This isn't fiction. This is the beginning of one of the most haunting mysteries that emerged from behind the Iron Curtain. A mystery so disturbing that even today, decades after the Soviet Union's collapse, people refuse to speak about it openly. Welcome to the darkest corner of Soviet history that you've never heard about. The phenomenon known in hushed circles as the green shadows. Between 1965 and 1978, hundreds of reports emerged across the Soviet Union describing encounters with strange, translucent green figures. These weren't the little green men of science fiction. Witnesses described them as human-shaped but wrong, distorted, moving in ways that defied physics, appearing in places they shouldn't be, and wherever they appeared, children disappeared. The Soviet government did what it did best. They buried the truth beneath layers of bureaucracy and fear. But here's what makes this story truly terrifying. The reports didn't come from unreliable sources or superstitious villagers alone. They came from engineers, military personnel, party officials, people whose careers depended on rationality and loyalty to Soviet materialism. People who had everything to lose by reporting the impossible. In 1968 alone, the KGB received over 200 formal reports of these green apparitions across 7 different Soviet republics. That's documented, archived, real. The patterns were disturbing. The sightings clustered around specific locations: abandoned factories, old prisons, sites of wartime massacres, places where Soviet history had left its darkest stains. Dr. Yevgeny Volkov, a psychologist at Moscow State University, was secretly tasked in 1970 to investigate what officials called mass hysteria events. His classified report, partially declassified in 2003, revealed something shocking. The witnesses weren't experiencing hallucinations. Their descriptions were too consistent across vast distances. People who had never met each other, separated by thousands of kilometers, described identical details. The sickly green luminescence, the sound like distant screaming, the smell of ozone, and something else, something organic and wrong. The way these figures moved, gliding rather than walking, sometimes passing through solid objects. But here's where it gets even stranger. Photography was strictly controlled in the Soviet Union, but some images survived. A 1969 photograph from Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, ALLEGEDLY, captured during a worker's birthday party, shows what appears to be a translucent green figure in the background. The figure is blurred, distorted. The original photographer, Viktor Sokolov, disappeared 3 weeks after taking that photo. His apartment was emptied by unknown individuals. His family claimed they were told he had been relocated for work. No records of this relocation were ever found. This pattern of witnesses disappearing became common. Too common to be coincidental. The Soviet scientific community was divided. Some researchers believed they were dealing with a psychological phenomenon, perhaps mass trauma from the war years manifesting in collective visions. Others whispered about government experiments gone wrong. Chemical weapons, radiation, something that had escaped containment and was now haunting the places where it had been created. In 1971, a team of scientists from the Academy of Sciences was sent to investigate a cluster of sightings in the Ural Mountains. This wasn't publicized. It wasn't meant to be. But one team member, Dr. Svetlana Kozlova, kept a journal. Her entries, discovered by her granddaughter in 2011, paint a horrifying picture. The team set up monitoring equipment in an abandoned mining facility where multiple sightings had occurred. For 3 nights, nothing happened. Then, on the 4th night, all their instruments went haywire. Electromagnetic readings spiked off the charts. Temperature dropped 15 degrees in seconds. And then they saw it. Dr. Kozlova's description is chilling. She wrote about a figure that seemed to be made of light and shadow simultaneously, green and luminous, but also somehow dark. It moved through the facility, passing through walls, leaving behind a trail of frost despite the summer heat. 2 team members fled. The rest stood frozen, unable to move. When it was over, when the thing had vanished, they found something. Scratches on the walls. Not random, but deliberate. Symbols, ancient symbols, that matched those found at other sighting locations. The investigation was immediately shut down. The team was dispersed to different cities. Their findings classified. Dr. Kozlova never spoke about it publicly. Her journal entries end abruptly after that night. Now, let's talk about the children. Because that's the heart of this darkness. Between 1965 and 1978, over 300 children disappeared in areas where green shadow sightings were reported. The official Soviet statistics show only normal rates of missing children. But unofficial records paint a different picture. Families who lost children in these circumstances faced something worse than grief. They faced suspicion. In the paranoid Soviet system, asking too many questions about your missing child could mark you as a troublemaker, a dissident. So people suffered in silence. But they remembered. And they whispered to each other in kitchens and courtyards. There's a pattern in the testimonies that survived. Children would talk about seeing a green friend. They'd draw pictures of these friends, always the same, tall, thin, glowing figures. Parents dismissed it as imagination. Then the child would disappear, usually from their bedroom at night. Windows and doors locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. In 1973, a Moscow mother named Irina Petrova did something remarkable. After her 7-year-old son Mikhail vanished, she began secretly documenting other cases. She traveled across the Soviet Union, risking everything, collecting stories from other families. Her notebook contained 47 detailed accounts, all following the same pattern. What happened to Irina Petrova? She was arrested in 1975 for spreading anti-Soviet propaganda. Her notebook was confiscated. She spent 2 years in a psychiatric hospital, which was the Soviet way of silencing inconvenient people. When she was released, she never spoke about it again. But her notebook survived, hidden by a sympathetic clerk. Parts of it surfaced in 2008. Now here's something that will make your blood run cold. In 1992, 3 years after the Soviet Union collapsed, Russian archaeologists excavating near an old NKVD prison in Ukraine found something, a mass grave. Nothing unusual about that, tragically. Soviet history is full of such graves, but this one was different. Among the adult bodies were the remains of children. Dozens of them. The forensic analysis revealed something impossible. The children's bodies showed signs of exposure to extreme cold, but they had died in summer. Their bones had unusual markings, consistent with rapid tissue degradation. And here's the kicker. Carbon dating and other analysis suggested they died decades apart. Yet they were buried together, in a single layer of earth deposited at the same time. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Anton Belov, went on record saying he had never seen anything like it. He described it as if all these children from different time periods had somehow ended up in the same place, at the same time. His team wanted to continue the investigation. They were ordered to stop. The site was sealed, officially classified as a memorial to victims of Stalinist repression. But some of Dr. Belov's team members couldn't let it go. They noticed something in their preliminary photographs. In the background of several images, there appeared to be a green luminescence. Not from their equipment, not from any natural source. The photographs were confiscated, but digital copies survived. You can find them if you know where to look online. Let's examine some theories. The rational explanations first. Some researchers suggest the green shadows were the result of industrial pollution. The Soviet Union was notorious for environmental disasters. Chemical plants releasing toxic substances that could cause hallucinations. This explains some cases. But it doesn't explain the consistency across known industrial areas. Others point to Cold War military experiments. Both sides conducted horrific tests on their own populations. Perhaps the green shadows were the side effect of some classified project involving psychotropic substances or radiation. This would explain the government cover-up. But it doesn't explain the physical evidence, the disappearances, the phenomena that continue even after the Soviet Union's collapse. Because here's the thing, the sightings didn't stop in 1991. They diminished, yes, but they continue. In 2019, a construction crew in Volgograd reported seeing green figures near an old factory they were demolishing. Local teenagers in Yekaterinburg posted videos on social media in 2022 showing what appears to be green luminescence in abandoned Soviet-era buildings. The Russian government doesn't acknowledge these reports. But they don't deny them either. There's a strange silence around the whole phenomenon. Unlike other Soviet mysteries that have been investigated and explained after declassification, this one remains taboo. Why? What's so dangerous about the truth that even post-Soviet Russia won't touch it? Some researchers believe the answer lies in Soviet-era experiments that were so unethical, so horrific, that acknowledging them would damage Russia's international standing even today. There are rumors of projects attempting to create the perfect soldier through paranormal means. Of experiments mixing science and occultism, desperate attempts by a failing system to find an edge. Documents that leaked in 2016 suggest there was a program called Green Dawn, operating between 1965 and 1982. The details are fragmentary, but they reference dimensional research, consciousness transfer, and something called biological energy matrices. The program was allegedly shut down after multiple containment failures. Could the green shadows be the result of Soviet scientists literally tearing holes in reality? It sounds like science fiction, but consider this. The Soviet Union invested billions of rubles in paranormal research. They took it seriously. The CIA files on Soviet psychic programs prove this wasn't fantasy. They were trying to weaponize the impossible. What if they succeeded? What if they succeeded too well? There's another theory, darker still. Some believe the green shadows aren't the result of experiments. They're something older. something that was always there, hidden in the vast Russian wilderness. And the Soviet industrialization, the pollution, the nuclear tests, the sheer violence of the 20th century Russian experience, somehow woke them up, made them visible, made them hungry. This theory draws on pre-Soviet Russian folklore, stories of forest spirits, of things that live between worlds. The Soviets tried to eliminate religion and superstition. They almost succeeded. But you can't kill stories. They survive in whispers, in warnings passed from grandparents to children, when the authorities aren't listening. Maybe those old warnings were based on something real. Consider the locations where sightings cluster. Many are sites of immense suffering, places where millions died during collectivization, the purges, the war. In some traditions, such places are considered spiritually wounded. What if extreme human suffering, on a massive scale, creates something, changes something? The green shadows always appear where the veil between worlds is thin, torn by trauma. Here's a documented case that supports this. In 1969, workers renovating a school in Minsk discovered a hidden room. Inside were the remains of 32 people, victims of an NKVD execution in 1937. Within days of this discovery, multiple workers reported seeing green figures. 3 children from the neighborhood disappeared within 2 weeks. The room was sealed, the renovations abandoned. Fast forward to 2004. A new owner purchased the building, unaware of its history. He planned to convert it into apartments. Within 3 months, he fled. He described the place as haunted by green lights and the sound of children crying. The building stands empty today. Local people avoid it. They know. Even if they don't know the details, they know. What can we learn from all this? First, that official records only tell part of any story. The Soviet system was built on secrets, layers upon layers of classified information, convenient disappearances, forced silence. Second, that trauma leaves marks. Whether you believe the green shadows are paranormal or the result of experiments, they're linked to suffering, to the darker chapters of Soviet history. Third, and perhaps most important, that some mysteries resist easy answers. We want everything to be explainable, rational, safe. But the universe might be stranger and more terrifying than we like to admit. The green shadows remind us that there are things we don't understand. Things that perhaps we shouldn't understand. As I researched this phenomenon, I spoke with elderly Russians who remember the Soviet era. Most refused to go on record. But one woman, now in her 80s, told me something I can't forget. She said when she was a child in Ukraine, her grandmother warned her never to play outside after dark, especially if she saw anything green. Not plants, not lights, anything green. She asked why. Her grandmother replied that during the war, during the famine, during the purges, so many people died that the earth itself became sick, and sick things bleed. She said the green was the earth bleeding, and that bleeding attracted things that feed on misery. Stay away from the green. Her grandmother insisted. It's hungry. It's always been hungry. I don't know what the green shadows are. No one really does. Maybe they're mass hysteria, the collective trauma of a nation manifesting in shared delusions. Maybe they're the result of Soviet experiments that went catastrophically wrong. Maybe there's something older and stranger, something we don't have words for, something that thrives where suffering has torn the fabric of reality. What I do know is that hundreds of families lost children, that thousands of people saw something that terrified them. But the Soviet government considered this serious enough to classify everything related to it, and that even now, reports continue. The story isn't over. It's just waiting. Waiting in abandoned buildings and forgotten places. Waiting in the gaps where history refuses to speak. So let me ask you something. Have you ever seen something you couldn't explain? A shadow that moved wrong? A light that shouldn't exist? Have you felt that primal fear, the one that reaches past reason straight to the survival instinct that kept our ancestors alive? That's what the green shadows represent. The reminder that we're not as in control as we think. Next time you're in an old building, in a place where bad things happened, pay attention, listen, watch, and if you see something green, something that glows with its own light, something that moves like it's not quite in our world, remember this story. Remember the children who disappeared. Remember that some mysteries are mysteries for a reason. Because the truth might be worse than not knowing. The Soviet Union is gone. The Iron Curtain fell. But the green shadows remain. They're patient. They've always been patient. They're the untold story, the whisper in the dark, the question without an answer. They're the proof that no matter how much we think we know, there's always something beyond our understanding. Something watching. Something waiting. I want to hear from you. Have you heard stories like this from your own country? Does your family have warnings passed down through generations? What do you think the green shadows really are? Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Share your thoughts, your theories, your own encounters with the unexplained. Let's keep this conversation going. See you in the next video.